Close your eyes, let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of the day leave your shoulders, your chest, your hands. Not all at once, just slowly, just gradually. The way tension releases when you stop holding it on purpose. You are safe, you are still, and tonight we travel far. Far from the world you know, far from its noise, its brightness, its urgent edges, the notifications and the deadlines and the small, anxious hum of modern life, all of it can wait. It will still be there tomorrow. Tonight, it does not exist. Tonight there is only this, a voice, a story, and the slow, reliable dark. We are going to a lake, a vast silver lake in the middle of a mountain valley, ringed by volcanoes that glow faintly against a darkening sky. The air is thin and cool up here, 4,000 feet above the sea. The stars are different from up here, closer somehow, more indifferent, older. They have watched many things from this altitude, and they have forgotten most of them. They will watch you too eventually, and forget you just as gently. It is the year 1519 by the calendar that will one day name this world. But the people who live here do not know that calendar. They have their own. They count in suns and cycles, in the movements of Venus across the sky, in the rhythm of sacred days that repeat every 52 years, like a held breath finally released. To them, this is not 1519. This is the year one reed. And one reed carries weight because one reed is the year of a prophecy, a year in which someone or something was promised to return. On that lake, Lake Texcoco, in the high valley of what will one day be called Mexico, there is a city. Not a town, not a settlement, a city built on water, built on an island, built by human hands from the mud and reed of a shallow lake over the course of nearly 200 years, growing from nothing into something that will stop the breath of every soldier who walks its causeways for the first time. A city of canals and pyramids and hanging gardens and markets that sell everything the known world produces. A city larger than London, larger than Paris, larger than any city in Spain, from which, right now, a small fleet of wooden ships has recently left. That city is Tenochtitlan, and the people who built it call themselves the Mexica, though the world will come to know them by another name, the Aztecs. This is their story, the story of how they rose from nothing, from wanderers, from outcasts, from a people that no one wanted and everyone drove away, to build the greatest empire the Americas had ever seen. An empire of millions stretching from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific, from the high plateau down to the jungles of the South. An empire whose capital was a wonder of the ancient world, whose priests climbed pyramids at dawn to feed the sun its daily portion, whose warriors were the most feared fighters in the known hemisphere, and the story of how, in the space of just 2 years, that empire fell, not slowly, not by decay, but all at once, like a flame going out. Let your body sink a little deeper into where you rest. There is nothing you need to do right now. Know where you need to be. No decision that cannot wait until morning. Only this. Only the slow drift of time, and a voice, and a story that crosses 500 years to reach you in the dark. We begin, as all great stories do, not at the peak, but at the very beginning, in hunger, in exile, in a people who had nothing and who looked at the world and decided quietly, without anyone's permission, that they would build something the world would not forget. The lake is waiting, the city is rising, and somewhere across the water a god is about to return. or so they believe. Breathe out slowly. Let your mind go quiet. We begin. Long before there was an empire, there was a prophecy. The Mexica people, the people who would one day become the Aztecs, were wanderers. For generations, perhaps centuries, they moved across the harsh landscape of northern Mexico, following a god they carried with them, Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird of the south, the god of war and the sun. Not a gentle god, not a distant one. He spoke to them, they believed, through priests. And what he said was this: "Walk, keep walking. You will know the place when you see it." They were not loved. Every tribe they encountered drove them away. They were too fierce, too strange, too devoted to rituals that disturbed their neighbors. The Mexica practiced sacrifice. They believed the sun required blood to rise each morning. Not symbolic blood, not the blood of animals alone, but human blood, offered on the altar, offered with intention, offered to keep the world alive. Other people found this unsettling. And so the Mexica wandered. For roughly 200 years, they wandered. From the north, from a mythic homeland they called Aztlan, the place of the herons, which may have been real or may have been a memory reshaped into legend. They crossed mountains and dry valleys, moving south toward the lake basin that shimmered with possibility in the center of the known world. They passed through territories already occupied by older, more powerful peoples. The Toltecs, whose ruined cities they admired with reverence, touching the stones as if proximity to greatness might transfer some of its quality. The Culhua, the Tepanec, the people of Texcoco, who ruled the lake that shimmered in the valley and looked down from their cities at these ragged newcomers with something between contempt and alarm. The Mexica were allowed to settle briefly in the territory of the Culhua. They served as mercenaries, fierce fighters, willing to do what others would not. They were useful in that limited, instrumental way that people without power are always permitted to be useful. But when they sacrificed the daughter of the Culhua king and sent her skin to be worn by a priest as an offering to their gods, they were expelled again. Hunted, in fact. Chased to the edge of the lake, where they waded into the shallows with nowhere left to go. You can imagine them there, standing in the cold water, their feet in the mud of the shallows, the reed beds stretching around them, the open water beyond. Nowhere to go back to, nowhere to go forward to. Just the lake and the sky and the slow, sad fact of being unwanted everywhere. And there, in the marsh, on a small island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, they saw it. An eagle, perched on a cactus growing from a rock in the water. The eagle held a serpent in its beak. It was the sign their god had promised, the place they had been walking toward for 200 years. It was not a beautiful island. It was swampy, difficult, half-submerged. The soil was thin. Fresh water was scarce. No one else wanted it. No other people had settled it because no other people had looked at it and seen possibility. That was perhaps the point. The god had given them the place no one else wanted because they were the people no one else wanted. They would have to build everything themselves. The year was 1325. They began to build. They drove wooden stakes into the shallow lake bed to create foundations. They built up soil, layer by layer, to create islands within the island. The chinampas, those remarkable floating gardens that would eventually cover vast stretches of the lake, impossibly fertile, producing 3 or 4 harvests a year from the black lake mud. They constructed causeways, long raised roads that stretched across the water to connect them to the mainland. They dug canals between the buildings so that canoes could move through the city like blood through veins. They called it Tenochtitlan, the place of the prickly pear cactus. In the beginning it was small, fragile. The Mexica were still vassals, still paying tribute to the Tepanec, who controlled the western shore of the lake. They were useful. Their soldiers fought the Tepanec's wars, expanded the Tepanec's power, died in the Tepanec's service, and in return they were permitted to exist. But the Mexica were patient. They always had been. They had learned across 200 years of wandering that survival required patience, that the moment would come, that you built quietly, carefully, until the day you didn't have to be small anymore. That day was coming. Let your breathing stay slow. The city is still small now, wooden and reed and careful, but close your eyes and watch it from above, from the dark water, and notice how it holds its shape against the current, how it refuses to sink. The Mexica are waiting for their moment. It is almost here. The moment came in 1426. The Tepanec ruler Tezozomoc, the old man who had kept the Mexica in check for decades, died. He was ancient by then, perhaps over 100 years old, a figure so long-lived that his death felt like the end of a geological era. And the moment he was gone, everything shifted. His son Maxtla took power. Maxtla was afraid of the Mexica, and fear makes rulers dangerous. He moved to eliminate the Mexica leader, a man named Chimalpopoca, who died in mysterious circumstances, possibly assassinated, possibly by his own hand. The details blurred by the weight of what came next. What came next was Itzcoatl. The new Mexica ruler was not a man given to patience in the way his predecessors had been. He was sharp, strategic, and surrounded by an advisor who would become one of the great architects of empire in human history, Tlacaelel. Tlacaelel is not a name that echoes through the world the way Caesar or Alexander does. But what he built was no less remarkable. He was the mind behind the Triple Alliance, the political arrangement that would transform 3 city-states around the lake into the engine of an empire. The alliance was forged between Tenochtitlan, Texcoco on the eastern shore, and Tlacopan to the west. 3 cities, 3 powers, united against the Tepanec, and in 1428 they struck. The Tepanec capital of Azcapotzalco fell. The people who had kept the Mexica as vassals were defeated, their power broken, their lands divided. The Mexica were vassals no more. But Tlacaelel understood something important. Winning a war is not the same as building an empire. To build an empire, you need a story. You need your people to believe, completely and without doubt, that what they are doing is not merely conquest. It is sacred duty. And so, Tlacaelel rewrote history. Literally. He gathered the existing historical codices, the painted books in which the Mexica kept their records, and burned them. He replaced them with new ones. In these new histories, the Mexica were not wandering outcasts who had been chased into a swamp. They were the chosen people of the sun. Their god, Huitzilopochtli, was not merely a tribal deity. He was the force that kept the sun moving across the sky. And without the blood offered on Mexica altars, the sun would stop. The world would end. Every enemy the Mexica conquered was not a victim. They were a necessary offering, fuel for the continuation of everything. This was not cynicism, or not only cynicism. Tlacaelel likely believed it. The priests believed it. The warriors believed it. and in believing it, they became something extraordinary. A people who fought not for treasure, not for land alone, but for the survival of the cosmos. When a Mexica warrior took a captive on the battlefield, he was not taking a prisoner. He was collecting an offering. When the captive was sacrificed at the top of the Great Pyramid, their heart held up to the sun, it was understood, by the Mexica, and perhaps even, in some cases, by the captive himself, as the highest possible act of meaning. The Flower Wars began in this period. Ritual conflicts with neighboring city-states designed specifically to capture warriors rather than kill them, to ensure a steady supply of sacrificial offerings. War as liturgy, liturgy as war. Under this arrangement, the empire expanded, slowly at first, then faster, valley by valley, coast by coast, reaching down to the Pacific, across to the Gulf, south toward what is now Guatemala. Peoples who resisted were crushed. Those who submitted were absorbed, allowed to keep their local rulers, required only to pay tribute. Cacao, cotton, jade, feathers of the quetzal bird, gold, and to supply soldiers and sacrifices when called upon. By the late 1400s, Tenochtitlan had grown into a city of 200,000 people, perhaps more. The Great Pyramid, the Templo Mayor, rose above it like a mountain made by human hands, its two shrines visible for miles across the flat water of the lake. The causeways were wide enough for 10 men to walk abreast. Aqueducts brought fresh water from the mainland. The markets of Tlatelolco, the twin city that had grown alongside Tenochtitlan, offered every good that could be carried, or paddled, or walked in from every corner of the known world. It was magnificent, and it was fragile in ways that its rulers could not yet see. Let the image settle. The city on the water, the pyramid at its center, the smoke from its altars rising in a thin line against the blue sky. It is the last morning of a very long peace. Something is coming from the east. In the spring of 1519, 11 ships appeared off the coast of what is now the Mexican Gulf. They had come from Cuba, where the Spanish had established their first foothold in the Americas a decade earlier. They carried 508 soldiers, 16 horses, and a number of large metal cylinders that could, when loaded with powder and stone, produce a sound like thunder and a force like nothing any person on this shore had ever experienced. Their leader was a man named Hernán Cortés. He was 33 years old. He was not authorized for this expedition. The governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez, had revoked his commission at the last moment, nervous about Cortés's growing ambition, and Cortés had sailed anyway, burning his boats behind him, metaphorically if not entirely literally, leaving himself no retreat and his men no option but forward. He was reckless, visionary, ruthless, and possessed of a quality that is difficult to name but immediately recognizable in retrospect. He understood situations faster than the situations could be explained to him. Cortés stepped onto the shore of what he would call New Spain, and he began to gather information. The information he gathered was extraordinary. There was, a few hundred miles to the west, across mountain ranges and deep valleys, a city unlike anything in the known world. It was ruled by an emperor named Moctezuma, or Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, to give him his full name, which means the Angry One, the Young, who commanded an empire of perhaps 5 to 6 million people. This empire extracted tribute from hundreds of subject peoples, in goods and labor, and soldiers and sacrifice. It was wealthy beyond imagining, and it was, beneath the surface of its power, deeply divided. The people who told Cortés this were the Totonac, a coastal group who had been conquered by the Aztecs and who resented their tribute obligations. The cacao, the cloth, the young men taken for sacrifice, with a quiet intensity that Cortés immediately recognized as useful. He listened to the Totonac with genuine attention. He made alliances. He promised freedom from tribute in exchange for support. He did not yet know if he could deliver on that promise, but he said it, and the Totonac believed him, and the first link of the coalition was forged. He received an ambassador from Moctezuma, gifts of gold and feathers and jade and elaborate mosaic masks sent perhaps to impress the strangers, perhaps to understand them, perhaps to satisfy a question that had been consuming the Aztec court since these men were first sighted off the coast. Moctezuma sent the gifts that a god would receive, or that a powerful foreign ruler might expect. He watched and waited and tried to understand what he was dealing with. Who were they? There was a figure in Aztec cosmology, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, the bringer of civilization and agriculture, who had once ruled a golden age and then departed eastward across the sea on a raft of serpents, promising one day to return. The year of his prophesied return was a year called one reed in the Aztec calendar. By the Aztec reckoning, 1519 was a year one reed. Cortés was bearded. He came from the east. He wore metal that gleamed like the sun. He was accompanied by creatures, the horses, that no one in this land had ever seen, animals so alien that some early descriptions struggled to contain them, these enormous deer that carried men, these animals that screamed like no known thing. Moctezuma hesitated. He sent gifts and messengers but did not act decisively. He did not mobilize his armies. He did not close the mountain passes. He waited and watched and tried to determine what the prophecy required of him. Historians have debated for centuries what he was truly thinking, whether he sincerely believed Cortés might be Quetzalcoatl returned, or whether the prophecy was simply one factor among many in a complex political calculation. The hesitation was real, and in the business of empire, hesitation is rarely free. Cortés moved inland, at the city of Cholula, a great religious city, hundreds of temples, one of the largest pyramids ever built. A massacre. 4,000 Cholulan nobles and warriors killed in a courtyard, in a carefully orchestrated act of violence designed to demonstrate to every watching people along the road that these newcomers were not ambassadors. They were conquerors. Fear was a strategic resource, and Cortés spent it deliberately. The message was received across the valley. And then, on November 8, 1519, Cortés walked the great southern causeway into Tenochtitlan. He had never seen anything like it. None of his soldiers had. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a soldier who would later write a memoir of the conquest, described their arrival with words that carry, even across 5 centuries, the texture of genuine astonishment. Great towers rising from the water, the smell of flowers, the silence of thousands watching from the bank. The Spanish were guests, honored guests, housed in a great palace near the center of the city, given food and gold and the freedom to walk the markets and look at whatever they wished. Moctezuma met with Cortés daily. They spoke through 2 interpreters, a Spanish soldier who had been shipwrecked on the Yucatan coast years earlier and learned the local Maya tongue, and a young woman who spoke both Maya and Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. Her name, before the Spanish gave her a new one, was Malintzin. They called her Doña Marina, or simply La Malinche. She was a Nahua woman who had been sold into slavery as a child, passed between peoples, given as a gift to Cortés by a coastal chief. She was intelligent, fluent, politically acute, and without her, the conquest of Mexico is almost impossible to imagine. Through Malintzin, Cortés learned. Through Malintzin, Moctezuma spoke. Between them, in the courtyard of that palace, the fate of an empire was being negotiated in whispers. The Spanish were also watching. Cortés had sent small groups of soldiers to explore the city, to observe its layout, to understand its causeways, the narrow, raised roads that connected the island to the shore, the roads that could, if the bridges were raised, trap an army in the middle of a lake with nowhere to go. He noted this. He noted everything. And then, 6 weeks after their arrival, Cortés did something that still has the quality of pure audacity when you read it 5 centuries later. He arrested Moctezuma. Quietly, without bloodshed, with elaborate courtesy and a set of justifications that Moctezuma, to the bewilderment of his own nobles, did not immediately refuse. There had been a skirmish on the coast, a Spanish soldier killed by men acting under Aztec orders. Cortés used this as a pretext. He told Moctezuma, through Malintzin, that for the emperor's own safety, he should come and reside in the Spanish quarters. Moctezuma came, and Tenochtitlan found itself in the extraordinary position of being ruled by an emperor who was a guest of the people who were his guests. The city held. The tribute continued to flow. The markets stayed open. Soldiers remained at their posts. Because Moctezuma told them everything was fine, and because the alternative, open war against men whose weapons and animals and diseases were not yet fully understood, seemed to Moctezuma perhaps worse. But the city was watching. And outside the city, on the roads that led from the coast, things were happening that Cortés could not have predicted. The governor of Cuba had sent a new expedition, a force of 19 ships and 900 soldiers, to arrest Cortés and bring him back to face punishment for his unauthorized departure. Cortés left Tenochtitlan in the hands of his lieutenant, a man named Pedro de Alvarado, and marched back to the coast to deal with this threat. He defeated the new force, persuaded most of their soldiers to join him instead, and began marching back to Tenochtitlan with a strengthened army. But while he was gone, Alvarado had done something. During a great religious festival, the Feast of Tenochtitlan, in which Aztec nobles and warriors gathered in the courtyard of the Templo Mayor to dance and perform ceremonies, Alvarado ordered an attack. The reasons have been debated. Fear of an uprising, some say, a preemptive strike, possibly simple greed for the gold and jade the dancers wore. Whatever the reason, Spanish soldiers sealed the exits and killed the people inside. Hundreds of unarmed Aztec nobles, killed in their ceremonial dress, in the space of their most sacred ritual. When Cortés returned to find the city in open revolt, he reportedly turned on Alvarado in fury, but the damage was done. The Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows, came weeks later. June 30th, 1520. Under cover of darkness, the Spanish attempted to flee the island along one of the causeways. The Aztecs had raised the bridges. Warriors attacked from canoes in the water. Hundreds of Spanish soldiers drowned under the weight of the gold they refused to abandon. Cortés himself reached the far shore and wept, or so the story goes, sitting beneath a tree, looking back at the burning city. He had lost, badly, but he was still alive, and he was not finished. Let the water settle. Let the night go quiet around the edges. The Spanish are gone for now. Tenochtitlan stands, but something has changed that cannot be unchanged. The city is still, the fires are out, and across the lake in the darkness, Cortés is planning. Moctezuma did not survive the night of sorrows. He died in the chaos of those weeks, the exact circumstances disputed then as now. The Spanish said the Aztecs killed him, angered by his collaboration. The Aztec sources said the Spanish killed him before they fled. What is agreed is that by the time Cortés regathered his forces on the shore, Moctezuma was dead, and a new ruler sat on the throne of Tenochtitlan, Cuitlahuac, brother of Moctezuma, a man chosen precisely because he had opposed accommodation from the beginning. Cuitlahuac ruled for 80 days. He died of smallpox. This is where the story of the Aztec fall becomes something larger than any army, larger than any general, larger than any single battle. Because the Spanish brought with them something invisible, something that traveled in the breath and the touch and the shared air of human contact, a disease for which the people of the Americas had no immunity, no history, no defense. Smallpox had moved through Europe for centuries. It had killed millions there too. But the survivors had, generation by generation, developed some resistance. Not immunity, but a partial defense, carried in the blood. The people of the Americas had no such defense. Their ancestors had crossed from Asia perhaps 15,000 years earlier, before this particular pathogen had traveled that way, and the populations of the two hemispheres had been separated long enough that their immune systems had diverged in fundamental ways. The disease arrived, possibly, with the first expedition. It spread inland faster than any army could march. In some regions, historians estimate, populations were cut by half. In others, more. In Tenochtitlan, Cuitlahuac died after 80 days of rule. His successor, a young man named Cuauhtemoc, nephew of Moctezuma, perhaps 25 years old, took the throne of an empire that was suddenly fighting two wars simultaneously. One against the men with metal and horses regrouping on the shore, and one against something he could not see, could not name, and could not fight. Cuauhtemoc was not like Moctezuma. He was young, fierce, uninterested in hesitation. He reinforced the city's defenses. He reached out to tributary peoples, asking for support. He prepared for siege. Cortés, meanwhile, had spent his months of retreat doing something that historians have since recognized as one of the most strategically sophisticated acts of the entire conquest. He built ships, not ocean ships, lake ships, 13 shallow draft brigantines, designed to be carried in pieces over the mountains and assembled on the shore of Lake Texcoco, where they could cut off the causeways, control the water, and prevent food and water from reaching the island city. He also built alliances. This is the part of the story that the simple conquest narrative tends to obscure. When Cortés finally closed in on Tenochtitlan in the spring of 1521, he was not doing so with 500 Spanish soldiers. He was doing so with an army of somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 indigenous fighters, Tlaxcalans, Texcocans, Totonacs, and dozens of other peoples who had spent years or decades under Aztec tribute and saw in this moment a chance to end it. The fall of the Aztec Empire was not, in that sense, a story of Europeans defeating indigenous people. It was, at least in its military dimension, a story of indigenous people, many of them, most of them, defeating an imperial power that had ruled over them with an extractive fist, using European-supplied weapons and leadership as a catalyst. This does not erase what came after. What came after? The installation of Spanish colonial rule, the destruction of temples and codices, the forced conversion and the mining and the epidemics, was its own catastrophe, and the peoples who allied with Cortés did not benefit from it the way they had hoped. But in the spring of 1521, standing on the shore of a lake they had been paying tribute across for generations, the Tlaxcalans and others were not victims of history. They were agents of it. The siege began in May. Tenochtitlan had perhaps 3 months of food stored. The aqueducts from the mainland were cut. The causeways were blockaded. The brigantines controlled the lake, preventing supply canoes from reaching the city. And the battle moved, block by block, canal by canal, toward the center. Sleep softly now. Let the image of the city hold in your mind. Its causeways, its canals, its pyramid rising above everything. It has stood for nearly 200 years. It will not stand much longer. The siege lasted 75 days. The Spanish tactic was systematic. Each day they advanced into the city along the 3 main causeways. Each night, the Mexica warriors counterattacked and often pushed them back. Each morning, before the advance resumed, the Spanish tore down the buildings they had taken the day before, filling the canals with rubble, eliminating the hiding places and ambush points that made urban fighting in Tenochtitlan so costly. This was not glorious war. It was slow, grinding, brutal demolition. Every house a battlefield, every canal a potential ambush. The Mexica fought with obsidian-bladed clubs and wooden shields, and the desperate knowledge that retreat meant the starvation of their families. The Spanish and their allies fought with steel swords and crossbows and the gradually increasing weight of numbers, as more and more tributary peoples joined the alliance, calculating that Tenochtitlan's fall was now inevitable. Inside the city, conditions were becoming unimaginable. The food ran out within weeks. People ate bark, leather, rats, the grass that grew in the cracks between stones. The water in the lake around them was salt water, undrinkable. The freshwater aqueducts had been cut. People drank the brackish water of the canals and became sick. The smallpox continued its invisible work alongside the visible war. Cuauhtémoc refused to negotiate. Cortés sent messengers offering terms, surrender, and the city would be spared. Cuauhtémoc sent the messengers back. He had seen what Spanish terms looked like at Cholula. He knew what capitulation meant. And perhaps he believed, even now, that the gods had not entirely abandoned his people, that Huitzilopochtli, who had guided the Mexica from their wandering exile to the greatest city in the Americas, might still intervene. But Huitzilopochtli was silent. Or perhaps, the priests reasoned, the god required more. More blood, more sacrifice. Some accounts describe captured Spanish soldiers and their Tlaxcalan allies being brought to the Templo Mayor during the siege and sacrificed on the altar. Their hearts offered to the sun, their bodies, the Spanish claimed in horror, thrown down the pyramid steps. Whether this is entirely accurate or shaped by the propaganda needs of the conquerors is difficult to say. But the ritual logic was consistent with everything that had come before. In extremity, the Mexica did what they had always done. They fed the sun. The sun did not answer. By August of 1521, the Spanish and their allies controlled roughly 3/4 of the island. The remaining population, fighters, women, children, priests, were compressed into the northern district of Tlatelolco, the old twin city where the great market had once drawn traders from across the empire. The market was silent now. The pyramid of Tlatelolco was still standing, but the smoke that rose from it was not incense. It was the smoke of a city being taken apart, stone by stone, to fill the canals that its builders had dug 2 centuries earlier. On the 13th of August, 1521, a canoe was spotted trying to escape across the lake. It was intercepted by a Spanish brigantine. Inside the canoe was Cuauhtémoc, the last emperor of the Aztecs, attempting, perhaps to flee, perhaps to find help, perhaps simply to survive long enough to rebuild. He was brought before Cortés. He reached down and touched the hilt of Cortés's dagger. He said, or is reported to have said in Nahuatl through Malintzin, something to this effect: "I have done everything I could to defend my city. Do with me as you will." Cortés did not kill him, not yet. He needed him as a symbolic figure, as a tool of governance, as proof that the Spanish held what the empire had held. Cuauhtémoc would live for several more years, a prisoner before being hanged on a later expedition accused of plotting rebellion. But the city was over. Tenochtitlan had ceased to exist. In its place, in the rubble, Cortés would begin building a new city, the capital of New Spain. Streets laid over the ruins. The great cathedral built directly on the foundations of the Templo Mayor, using the same stones, the same labor, the same ground. It is called Mexico City now. 22 million people live there. Somewhere under their feet, under the cathedral and the streets and the pipes and the cables, the ruins of Tenochtitlan still sit in the soft lakebed sediment, occasionally surfacing when someone digs a new metro tunnel. The city on the water is gone, but it is still there. After the fall, the counting began. Not of the dead. No one will ever know the number of the dead with precision. The siege alone may have killed 50,000 people. The epidemics that moved through central Mexico in the years around the conquest may have killed far more. Some estimates suggest that within a century of contact, the indigenous population of Mexico had fallen by as much as 90%, from perhaps 25 million people to perhaps 2 million. These numbers are uncertain, are still debated, are almost too large to hold in a single thought. But what the Spanish counted was everything else. The gold. It was less than they expected. Much of the treasure of Tenochtitlan had been scattered during the Night of Sorrows, dropped into the lake by fleeing soldiers, hidden by the Mexica, dissolved into the general chaos of the siege. Cortés sent divers into the lake. He tortured Cuauhtémoc, had his feet burned over coals, trying to learn where the rest of the gold was. Cuauhtémoc reportedly looked at his companion, also being tortured, and said, "Am I on a bed of roses?" The gold, mostly, was not found. What the Spanish found instead, what they eventually built, was something more durable and more terrible than treasure. They found a continent. They found silver in the mountains of what is now northern Mexico and Peru, vast deposits that would, over the next century, flow across the Atlantic in Spanish ships and reshape the economy of the entire world. They found a labor supply in the indigenous people who survived the epidemics, organized first into the encomienda system, where Spanish colonizers were granted the labor of native people as if it were a natural right, and then into more formalized systems of extraction that would persist in various forms for centuries. The temples were torn down. The codices, those painted books that held the history and astronomy and ritual knowledge of the Mexica and their neighbors, were burned, most of them, by Spanish priests who believed they were the work of the devil. Of the hundreds that existed before the conquest, perhaps a dozen survive. The knowledge of generations, of centuries turned to ash. The Nahuatl language survived, spoken still by over 1.5 million people in Mexico today. The great market of Tlatelolco, in a sense, never entirely stopped. Mexico City's street food and markets carry something of its energy, its multiplicity, its habit of bringing everything to one place. The image of the eagle on the cactus with the serpent is the flag of Mexico. Cuauhtémoc is a national hero. Cortés has no statue in Mexico City. The Mexica gods are gone officially, but they are not entirely gone. In the paintings on the walls of Diego Rivera, in the festivals that blend indigenous ceremony with Catholic overlay, in the way certain places in central Mexico still carry, if you are willing to sit quietly in them, something that does not quite belong to the Spanish colonial world and never will. History is never entirely over. The city on the water is gone. But something of it remains in the sediment, in the language, in the blood of millions of people who carry in their ancestry both the conquered and the conqueror, both Cuauhtémoc and Cortés, both the priest at the altar and the soldier at the gate. This is not a tragedy in the simple sense. Or not only that, it is something more complicated, more human. It is a story about what empires do and what they cost, not only for the people they conquer, but for the people who build them. The Mexica were conquerors too, the peoples they had subjugated for a century, the Tlaxcalans, the Totonacs, the others who marched alongside Cortés, had their own grievances, their own memories of tribute and sacrifice and subordination. Empire is always this, always the weight laid on the shoulders of the next generation, always the question, deferred, of how long the weight can be carried before the carrier sets it down. Let this settle around you. Let the history rest. You are in the dark now, in the warm quiet, and the lake is 500 years away. The city on the water, the eagle and the serpent, the heart held up to the sun. It is still. Before we close, sit with this for a moment. There is something about the Aztec story that resists the simple shapes we usually give to history. It is not a story of savagery defeated by civilization. The civilization of Tenochtitlan, its aqueducts and floating gardens, its schools where all children were educated regardless of class, its sophisticated calendar more accurate than the European one in use at the time, its markets that traded goods across 2,000 miles, was not lesser than what replaced it. It was different. It was, in many ways, extraordinary. It is also not a story of an innocent people destroyed by outside evil. The Aztec Empire was an empire. It extracted tribute through force. It demanded sacrifice from its subject peoples. It fought wars designed to capture human beings for the altar. The Tlaxcalans who fought alongside Cortés had real reasons for their resentment. Reasons built on generations of coercion, tribute, and loss. They were not traitors to some imagined pan-indigenous solidarity. They were people acting in their own interests, as all people in all times tend to do. What it is, perhaps, is a story about the contingency of the world. about how close the outcomes always are, about how much history turns on small things, on a shipwrecked sailor who happened to learn the right language, on a young woman named Malintzin who understood more than anyone around her, on a governor in Cuba who moved too slowly to stop a fleet that had already left harbor, on a disease traveling invisibly ahead of any army, on a hesitation that lasted one day too long. Remove any one of these small things, and the world becomes unrecognizable. Moctezuma acts decisively in the first weeks, and the Spanish are driven back to the coast. The smallpox reaches the mainland a year later, and the siege is resisted. Cuauhtémoc escapes the lake in his canoe and finds the allies he needs. The Tlaxcalans decide the risk of alliance with strangers is greater than the cost of continued tribute. Any of these. And the city on the water stands. We do not live in the world where the city stands. We live in this one. But knowing how close it was, how easily it could have been otherwise, is a kind of gift. It reminds us that the world we inherit is not inevitable. It was made by choices, by accidents, by the particular configuration of 1,000 small moments that happened to fall a certain way. It could have fallen differently. And it is a story about belief. The Mexica believed their god required blood to keep the sun moving. This belief shaped everything. Their wars, their cities, their relationships with other peoples, the entire structure of their world. We look back from 5 centuries away and see the cost of that belief in human terms. But we might also ask what beliefs shape us now, invisibly, the way a fish does not see the water it swims in. Every civilization lives inside a story it tells about itself, a story about why it exists, what it is for, what the universe requires of it. The Mexica story said, "You are the people of the sun. Without you, the cosmos fails. Fight, sacrifice, expand, or darkness comes." What is our story? What does our civilization believe at its foundation that it will not examine until it is gone? These are not questions with easy answers. They are questions to carry. Carry them gently. They do not need to be resolved tonight. Tonight you have traveled a long way, from a swamp in the middle of a Mexican lake, where a group of outcasts saw an eagle on a cactus and decided, against all evidence, that this was where they belonged, to the greatest city in the Americas, to the long siege, to the silence that follows every fallen empire. The pyramid still stands, in a sense, under Mexico City, under the cathedral, under the streets and the pipes and the metro lines. If you dig down far enough, you find it. The stone the priests climbed, the altar, the offering bowls, all of it still there, patient in the dark, waiting to be found again. The eagle is on the flag. The sun is still rising. Breathe slowly. Let your thoughts loosen. Let the images soften at their edges and begin to drift. The lake is quiet now. The water is still. And now we drift. Let the story release you. Let all of it, the warriors and the priests, the gold and the lake, the sound of brigantines on the water, the silence after the last battle, let all of it soften at the edges, the way the image of a candle softens when your eyes lose their focus. You have done enough. You have listened and traveled and held all of this in your mind for a long time. Now you can let it go. You don't have to hold it anymore. It will still be there in the morning if you want it. But right now, there is nothing you need to carry. Feel the weight of your body where it rests, the points of contact, the back of your head, your shoulders, the length of your spine, the backs of your legs. each one a small anchor to the present moment, to here, to now, to this particular room, this particular dark, this particular quiet that belongs only to you tonight. Let your breathing do what it wants. Don't try to control it. It has been doing this without your help since the day you were born, since before you could think, since before you could know what breath was. It will do it long after you fall asleep. It will do it all night while your mind goes somewhere else entirely. You don't have to manage it. You can let it go. Let it slow. Notice how the exhale is a little longer than the inhale. Notice how there is a small pause at the bottom of each breath, a moment of stillness, a moment where nothing is moving. Let yourself rest in that pause, just for a moment, just in that small gap between the breath going out and the breath coming in. That gap is yours. Let your hands relax, your fingers, the small muscles of your palms, the slight curl that hands hold when they're not paying attention. Let them open, just slightly. Let them soften. The jaw especially, that subtle tension that holds the day together, the slight press of teeth, the tightness along the hinge where the day's effort accumulates. Let it soften. Let your tongue drop away from the roof of your mouth. Let the small muscles around your eyes release. The forehead, the space between your eyebrows that tightens without you noticing. Let it all go. You are not on a causeway tonight. You are not on a lake. There are no armies in the distance, no ships on the horizon, nothing coming that needs your attention. The world is quiet. The world is still. And so are you. Somewhere 500 years ago, a city stood on water. It glittered in the early morning light. The market was opening, the vendors arranging their goods on mats along the canal banks, jade and cacao and bright feathers and pottery and flowers, always flowers. Tenochtitlan was full of flowers. The canoes were moving through the canals. Children were going to school. Priests were climbing the pyramid steps as the sky turned from black to deep blue to the first pale edge of dawn. Someone was walking the great southern causeway to the mainland, sandals on stone, the lake stretching flat and silver on either side. The volcano Popocatépetl wearing its white crown to the southeast, patient as always, old as always. The smell of the lake in the morning, the sound of birds. That person could not have known what was coming. None of us ever do. But they walked the causeway. They moved through their morning. They did the small, necessary, irreplaceable things of their life. In the city they knew, in the world they understood. And for a moment, just that moment, the moment of walking with the lake on both sides and the volcano in the distance, it was enough. It was enough to be alive, to be walking, to be in the world. Let that be enough for you too tonight. You are here. You are breathing. You are resting. The day is done, and whatever it held, its small victories and its frustrations, its unexpected moments of beauty, its ordinary weight, all of it is behind you now. It was what it was. It will become what it becomes. None of that requires your attention tonight. Let your thoughts loosen their hold. Let them move the way canoes move on still water. Gently, without urgency, not toward anything in particular. Just drifting, just moving with the current, and one by one, finding somewhere quiet to stop. The city is quiet now. The lake is still. The eagle has landed. You are almost there. Let yourself fall. There is nothing you need to hold on to. There never was. The water is warm. The dark is soft. Sleep.